My name is Elara Hensley, and I had just turned 20 when everything in my life changed. I wasn't expecting much for my birthday, maybe a small dinner with my family, a store-bought cake, and the usual obligatory smiles. That's how things usually went in the Hensley household. But this year, my grandmother, Sylvie, had other plans. Grandma Sylvie wasn't like the rest of my family. She was a force of nature, sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and always dressed impeccably, even in her 70s. She had this quiet strength about her, like she'd weathered storms no one else could understand. I admired her more than anyone, and it felt like she saw something in me that no one else did. So, when she handed me an envelope at the end of the night, with a sly little smile on her face, I was curious but didn't think much of it. "Open it later, when it's just you," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. Her pale blue eyes locked with mine for a moment before she added, "And promise me you'll use it wisely." I nodded, a little puzzled, but too polite to press her for answers in front of everyone. My mother, Freya, and father, Jonah, didn't seem to notice the exchange. They were too busy fussing over my older sister, Marissa, who had, once again, turned the evening into her personal performance. Marissa was the golden child, the center of attention since the day she was born. If she wasn't talking about her latest accomplishments, she was complaining about her problems, which always seemed to involve some financial crisis. Later that night, in the quiet of my room, I finally opened the envelope. What I found inside made my heart race, a check for $50,000 signed by Grandma Sylvie herself. My hands trembled as I stared at the number. $50,000. I read the note attached. "Elara, this is for your education and your future. I've watched you dream big, even when others didn't notice. Use this to chase those dreams. Don't let anyone take this away from you. Love, Grandma." My breath caught in my throat. I'd always dreamed of becoming an architect, of designing buildings that could shape the world. But money had always been a barrier, and I'd resigned myself to the reality that those dreams might never come true. Now, here it was, a lifeline, a gift that could change everything. The next morning, I walked downstairs clutching the check, unsure of what to do with it. I was greeted by the familiar hum of family tension. Freya was at the kitchen table, her sharp features drawn tight as she whispered something to Jonah. His expression was grim, and he avoided looking at me as I entered the room. Marissa lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the world around her. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual, but Freya's eyes immediately darted to the envelope in my hand. Her face shifted, a mix of curiosity and something darker. "What's that?" she asked, her tone too casual to be genuine. I hesitated. "It's from Grandma," I said. "She gave me something for my birthday." Marissa finally looked up, her interest piqued. Freya's eyes narrowed slightly, and Jonah's jaw tightened. I felt the weight of their scrutiny as I unfolded the check and held it up for them to see. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Freya let out a breathy laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, "that's certainly generous of her, isn't it, Jonah?" Jonah nodded stiffly. "Very generous." Marissa, on the other hand, shot to her feet, her eyes wide. $50,000? Are you serious? She gave you 50 grand? She wanted me to use it for college, I said quickly, already feeling the tension build. Freya's smile grew tighter. "Of course she did," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Sylvie always did have a soft spot for you." She exchanged a glance with Jonah, one that I couldn't quite interpret, but it made my stomach churn. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. My family wasn't happy for me. They weren't celebrating my good fortune. They were calculating. And though I didn't know it yet, that check was about to tear my entire world apart. The rest of the day passed in a haze, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. My mother, Freya, had been unusually quiet, her sharp eyes darting toward me every time I moved. Jonah avoided me altogether, burying himself in the newspaper like he always did when things got tense. And Marissa was uncharacteristically distant, barely looking at me, though I caught her stealing glances at the check when she thought I wasn't paying attention. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the murmurs. My parents were arguing in the kitchen, their voices low but urgent. I crept out of my room and down the hall, the hardwood floor cool under my bare feet. I stayed just out of sight, close enough to catch snippets of their conversation. "She's going to waste it," Freya hissed. "College? Please. She doesn't even know what she's doing with her life." Jonah's voice was quieter, harder to make out, but I caught the words, "Marissa's debts, and no other option." My heart pounded in my chest. My hands clenched into fists as realization dawned. They wanted the money. They wanted to take what Grandma had given me, what she had entrusted to me, and hand it over to Marissa to bail her out of whatever trouble she'd gotten herself into this time. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my parents. Every time they'd brushed me aside for Marissa, every time they'd made me feel like I didn't matter. This wasn't just about the money. This was about all the years I'd been the afterthought, the one who didn't cause problems but didn't get attention either. The next morning, they didn't even try to ease into it. Freya and Jonah were waiting for me at the kitchen table, their faces grim but determined. Marissa sat nearby, her arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. The air was heavy, like the moments before a storm. "Elara," Freya began, her voice soft but rehearsed. "Your father and I need to talk to you about something important." I sat down slowly, clutching my mug of coffee like it was a lifeline. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Freya leaned forward, her expression a mix of pity and sternness. "You know Marissa's been going through a rough time," she said. "She's been struggling financially, and your father and I have done everything we can to help her, but we're running out of options." I said nothing, staring at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Jonah chimed in, his tone measured but firm. "We're asking you as a family to help her. She's your sister, Elara. Family takes care of each other." There it was. They weren't asking. They were demanding. "That's not what Grandma wanted," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry the weight of my words. "She gave me that money for my education, for my future. She trusted me with it." Freya's face hardened. "Don't be naive, Elara. Your grandmother would have wanted you to use that money to help your family. She wouldn't want you hoarding it for some fantasy about college." "It's not a fantasy," I snapped. "I've worked hard for this. I've sacrificed for this. Grandma believed in me." Marissa finally spoke, her voice dripping with indignation. "Oh, give me a break, Elara. You're acting like you're the only one with dreams. I'm in real trouble here. I could lose everything." "And whose fault is that?" I shot back. "I'm not the one who racked up debt I couldn't handle." Freya slammed her hand on the table, making me jump. "That's enough, Elara. You're being selfish. We're talking about your sister's life here. You're young. You'll have other chances. Marissa doesn't." "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low but shaking with anger. "Don't you dare tell me what chances I'll have. You've never believed in me, but Grandma did, and I'm not going to throw away the one thing she gave me to save Marissa from her own mistakes." Freya's face turned red with fury. "If you walk out of this house without helping your sister, don't bother coming back." The room fell silent. Marissa stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jonah looked away, as if he couldn't bear to face me. I stood up, my legs trembling but my resolve stronger than it had ever been. "Fine," I said. "If that's how you feel, I won't come back." I turned and walked to my room, slamming the door behind me. As I packed my belongings, tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I was done being their afterthought, their scapegoat. I left the house that morning with nothing but a suitcase, Grandma's check tucked safely into my jacket pocket, and a heart full of pain and determination. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free. Or so I thought. The rain started falling just as I stepped out of the house, a cold drizzle that soaked through my jacket and clung to my skin. It felt fitting, really, like the world was echoing the storm inside me. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and walked down the driveway without looking back. If I turned around, I might have faltered, and I couldn't afford that. Kaya was waiting for me at her apartment, just like she always had whenever things got tough. She was my best friend, the kind of person who saw through my quiet, reserved demeanor and reminded me of my worth. When I showed up at her door, dripping wet and shivering, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and handed me a steaming cup of tea. "You left," she said softly, sitting across from me on the couch. It wasn't a question. Kaya always had a way of knowing. I nodded, my voice cracking as I tried to explain. "They wanted the money. Grandma's money. They wanted me to give it to Marissa to pay off her debts." Kaya's brows shot up. "And you said no?" "I said no," I confirmed, wiping at my damp face. "And then my mom told me not to bother coming back." For a moment, Kaya just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back with a slow exhale. "Well, damn," she said. "Good for you." Her response caught me off guard. "Good for me?" I echoed, my voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes, good for you," she said firmly. "Elara, you've been putting up with their crap for as long as I've known you. You finally stood up for yourself. I'm proud of you." Her words hit me like a wave, and for the first time since I'd walked out of the house, the tears spilled over. "I feel awful," I admitted. "What kind of person says no when their family needs help?" Kaya leaned forward, her gaze steady. The kind of person who knows her limits. The kind of person who refuses to be taken advantage of. "Elara, they weren't asking you for help. They were demanding a sacrifice. There's a difference." I nodded, though the guilt still lingered. Kaya was right. I knew that deep down, but years of being told otherwise didn't fade so easily. Later that night, as I sat on Kaya's couch with a pillow hugged tightly to my chest, my phone buzzed. I hesitated before picking it up, my stomach twisting when I saw Marissa's name on the screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Elara!" Marissa's voice was sharp and strained, like she'd been crying. "Where are you?" "I'm not telling you," I said immediately. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "You can't just leave," she snapped. "Mom and Dad are freaking out." "Are they?" I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. "Or are they just mad they didn't get what they wanted?" She ignored my question. "You're being selfish," she said, her voice rising. "You're letting me drown when you could save me. Do you even care what happens to me?" Something inside me snapped. "Do you care what happens to me?" I shot back. Because for as long as I can remember, I've been the one cleaning up after you. I've been the one sacrificing so you could screw up over and over again without consequences. I'm done, Marissa. I'm not doing it anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she'd hung up. But then her voice came back, quieter this time. "You'll regret this," she said. "When everything falls apart, don't come crying to me." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at the screen with a mix of anger and sadness swirling in my chest. I set the phone down and leaned back, closing my eyes as Kaya came over and sat beside me. "Let me guess," she said. "Marissa tried to guilt trip you?" "She's good at it," I said bitterly. Kaya placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "They're going to keep trying, Elara. You know that, right? But you're stronger than they think, and you don't have to go through this alone." For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but with Kaya by my side and Grandma's words echoing in my heart, I knew I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Still, as I lay awake that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The days that followed felt like a strange mix of liberation and uncertainty. Kaya insisted I stay as long as I needed, turning her tiny one-bedroom apartment into a sanctuary. She worked long hours at a local bakery, so I often found myself alone with my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going back. Every time I thought about the confrontation with my parents and Marissa, anger bubbled beneath the surface, but it was mixed with something deeper: hurt. They hadn't just asked for the money. They'd made it clear that my worth, in their eyes, was tied to how much I could sacrifice for them. Grandma Sylvie had seen something different in me, and I wasn't about to let her down. One afternoon, while rummaging through my suitcase, I found the envelope with Grandma's check again. I hadn't looked at it since that first night, but there it was, tucked safely among my clothes. As I pulled it out, something else slipped out of the envelope, a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. My breath caught as I unfolded it, revealing Grandma's neat handwriting. "Elara, if you're reading this, it means you've taken the first step toward living the life you deserve. I know your family will try to take this from you. They've done it before, and they'll do it again. But this money isn't just a gift, it's a shield. Use it to protect your dreams, to carve out a path that belongs only to you. And remember, you are stronger than they'll ever understand. Love always, Grandma Sylvie." My hands trembled as I read the letter over and over again. She knew. Grandma had seen it all. The manipulation, the guilt, the way they'd always taken and taken without giving back. And she had planned for it, leaving me not just the money, but her unwavering belief in me. Tears filled my eyes as I clutched the letter to my chest. For the first time in days, the guilt began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of determination. That night, I told Kaya about the letter. She listened intently, her expression softening as I read Grandma's words aloud. When I finished, Kaya leaned back and crossed her arms. "Sylvie sounds like a badass," she said with a small smile. "She was," I said, my voice steady. "And she's right. This is my chance to build something for myself. I just don't know where to start." Kaya tilted her head thoughtfully. "What about school? Isn't that what you've always wanted?" I nodded, but doubt crept in. "It feels impossible now. I've missed deadlines, and I don't even know if I could afford it, even with the money." Kaya grinned. "Then we figure it out. Tomorrow we'll look into your options. If Grandma Sylvie believed in you, I do too. The next day, armed with Kaya's relentless encouragement, I started researching colleges again. I called admissions offices, emailed financial aid departments, and pored over applications late into the night. It felt overwhelming, but with every step, I could almost hear Grandma's voice urging me forward. But just as I began to feel like I was finding my footing, trouble came knocking, literally. It was late one evening, and I was curled up on Kaya's couch with my laptop, going through another application. The knock at the door was sharp and insistent, and my stomach dropped the moment I heard it. Kaya opened the door cautiously, but the second she did, Marissa pushed her way inside, her face pale and frantic. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Marissa looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. "I'm in trouble, Elara. Serious trouble." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marissa hesitated, glancing at Kaya, who was still standing by the door, arms crossed. Finally, she said, "Can we talk in private?" "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." She bit her lip, her gaze darting around the room before finally meeting mine. "I owe money," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A lot of money, and the people I owe it to aren't the kind of people you can ignore." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about credit card bills or reckless spending. Marissa had gotten herself into something far more dangerous, and now she was dragging me into it. "I don't have the money to bail you out," I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising inside me. "You do," Marissa said quickly. "Grandma's money. It's more than enough." I stared at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious. After everything, you're still trying to take that from me?" "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice rising. "If I don't pay them back, they're going to come after me. Do you get that? This isn't a joke, Elara." Kaya stepped forward, her voice sharp. "And you think that's Elara's problem? She's already given up enough for you." Marissa turned to her, her eyes blazing. "You don't understand. This isn't just about family drama anymore. This is life or death." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on all of us. I didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I stared at Marissa, trying to process what she'd just said. Life or death. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She looked desperate, the bravado and entitlement I'd always associated with her completely stripped away. For the first time, I saw her fear. Not the kind of fear she could manipulate others with, but raw, unfiltered terror. "How did it get this bad?" I asked, my voice trembling. Marissa looked down, wringing her hands. "It started small," she said quietly. "A few loans to cover my credit cards. Then I started falling behind. I borrowed more, thinking I could pay it off later. And then I met someone." Kaya crossed her arms, her expression hard. "Someone who made things worse, I'm guessing." Marissa flinched. "He said he could help, that he knew people who could lend me what I needed. I was desperate, okay? I didn't know what I was getting into." "Who are they?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Marissa hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was afraid someone might overhear. "They're not the kind of people you can mess with," she said finally. "If I don't pay them back soon, they'll come after me. And you think giving them Grandma's money will fix it?" I said, my anger rising. "You think they'll just leave you alone after that?" Marissa's eyes flashed with desperation. It's my only chance, Elara. I don't have anything else. Please, you have to help me. Kaya stepped forward, her voice firm. You don't even know if they'll stop there. People like that? They'll bleed you dry. And now you're dragging Elara into this? How is that fair? Marissa glared at her, her usual defiance resurfacing. This isn't about fair. This is about survival. Stop, I said sharply, cutting through their argument. Both of them turned to look at me, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were spinning, but one thing was clear. I couldn't make this decision on impulse. I need time to think, I said, looking directly at Marissa. I'm not saying yes, and I'm not saying no. But if you want me to even consider this, I need all the details. No more secrets. Marissa hesitated, then nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Whatever you need. Kaya gave me a wary look. Elara, are you sure about this? No, I admitted. But I need to understand what I'm dealing with. The tension in the room was unbearable as Marissa sat down and began to explain. She told me everything, the escalating debts, the threats, the shady figures she'd gotten involved with. The more she talked, the more I realized just how deep she was in. This wasn't just a financial mess. It was a ticking time bomb. When she finished, she looked at me with pleading eyes. I know I've screwed up, she said, but you're my sister. Please, Elara, you're my only hope. I stood up, unable to stay still any longer. I need air, I said, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. Kaya called after me, but I didn't stop. I stepped outside into the cool night, the crisp air stinging my cheeks. For a moment, I just stood there, staring up at the sky. My mind was racing, torn between anger, fear, and guilt. How had it come to this? Marissa had made her choices, but now those choices were threatening to pull me down with her. And yet, could I really walk away, knowing what was at stake? I pulled Grandma's letter out of my pocket and unfolded it, letting her words wash over me again. This money isn't just a gift. It's a shield. Use it to protect your dreams, to carve out a path that belongs only to you. Tears blurred my vision. What would Grandma have done in my place? Would she have let Marissa face the consequences of her actions? Or would she have stepped in, risking everything to protect her? Kaya's voice broke through my thoughts. She'd followed me outside, her expression softening when she saw the tears on my face. You don't owe her this, you know, she said gently. You've given enough? I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But she's my sister. Kaya sighed. Being family doesn't give her the right to take from you. Don't forget that. I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. The truth was, I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that no matter what choice I made, there would be consequences, ones I might not be ready to face. But one thing was certain, the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. And whatever happened next, I'd have to be stronger than I'd ever been before. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, the weight of the night before still pressing heavily on me. Marissa had left shortly after I went outside, saying she needed to figure out her next move. Kaya and I hadn't talked much after that. She'd sensed I needed space and let me brood in silence. But now, as the sunlight streamed through the blinds in Kaya's small apartment, I knew I couldn't put off the decision any longer. Kaya was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up as I walked in, her expression soft but concerned. You okay? She asked. I shrugged, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Not really, I admitted. I've been going over everything in my head all night, and I still don't know what to do. Kaya frowned. Elara, I know this is hard, but you can't let her guilt you into giving up everything. You've worked too hard for this." "I know," I said quietly. "But if I don't help her and something happens, I don't think I could live with that." Kaya sighed, setting her cup down. "So, what's your plan?" "I don't have one," I said, sitting down across from her. "But I need to talk to her again. I need to know exactly how much she owes, who she owes it to, and whether there's any way out that doesn't involve handing over Grandma's money." Kaya didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you. I don't trust her not to manipulate you." I smiled faintly. "Thanks, Kaya." Later that afternoon, I called Marissa and told her to meet us at a nearby park. When she arrived, she looked more composed than the night before, but the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her jaw gave her away. She sat down on the bench across from us, her gaze darting nervously between me and Kaya. "I'm here," she said. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said firmly. "No more half-truths, no more excuses. If you want my help, I need the full story." Marissa hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Okay," she said finally. "I owe $25,000. It started with credit cards, but the real problem is the loan I took out from a private lender." Kaya raised an eyebrow. "Private lender? You mean a loan shark?" Marissa flinched but nodded. "Yes. His name's Darian. He runs a business, and he doesn't take kindly to late payments." "How long have you been late?" I asked, my stomach sinking. 3 months, she admitted. "The interest has been piling up. If I don't pay him soon, he said he'll come after me, and he wasn't just talking about money." Kaya leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And you think paying him off will make him go away? People like that don't just let you walk free after one payment." Marissa's face crumpled, and for the first time, she looked truly helpless. "I don't know what else to do," she said. "I thought maybe if I could just pay him back, I could start over, get a fresh start." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about danger. Real, physical danger. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't ignore the fear in her voice or the fact that, no matter how flawed she was still my sister. "I'll help you," I said finally, my voice steady but cautious. "But there are conditions." Marissa's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Anything," she said quickly. "I'll do anything." "First," I said, "you're going to meet with someone who can help you manage your debts and figure out a plan to get back on your feet. No more borrowing, no more quick fixes. You need to take responsibility for this." She nodded quickly. "Okay, I can do that." "Second," I continued, "I'm not giving you the full amount. I'll pay what you owe to Darian directly, but the rest of the money stays with me. You're not touching it." Her face fell slightly, but she nodded again. "I understand." "And third," I said, leaning forward, "if you ever get yourself into something like this again, you're on your own. This is the last time I'm bailing you out." Marissa hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I won't mess up again," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, Elara." Thank you, Kaya watched her carefully, her expression unreadable. "I hope you mean that," she said, "because Elara is taking a huge risk for you." Marissa nodded, wiping her eyes. "I do. I mean it." As we left the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a tightrope, balancing between my loyalty to my family and my responsibility to myself. I didn't know if Marissa would keep her promise or if this would come back to haunt me, but for now, it was the only choice I could live with. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. it was only the beginning of whatever came next. The following week was a whirlwind of tense conversations, sleepless nights, and careful planning. True to my word, I arranged a meeting with Darian, the so-called lender Marissa owed. Kaya insisted on coming with me, and I was grateful for her presence. She had a way of grounding me when my emotions threatened to take over. Darian wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone rough, intimidating, maybe even violent. Instead, he was impeccably dressed, with a cool, detached demeanor that somehow felt even more threatening. He greeted us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, ushering us into a small, dimly lit office at the back of a nondescript building. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands neatly on the desk. "You're the sister." I nodded, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "I'm here to settle Marissa's debt." He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "That's very noble of you, but settling debts isn't as simple as writing a check." Kaya leaned forward, her voice sharp. "She owes $25,000. That's what we're here to pay. What's complicated about that?" Darian's smile widened slightly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "The $25,000 is principal, but there's also interest, late fees. Let's not forget my time, which is, as they say, money." My stomach sank. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He tapped a finger against his chin, pretending to think. "Let's call it an even $40,000. $40,000? I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "That's insane. You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted smoothly, his tone icy. "And I have. Your sister knew what she was getting into when she borrowed from me." Kaya opened her mouth to argue, but I placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. As much as I wanted to fight, I knew it would only make things worse. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "I'll pay it. But once I do, we're done. You don't come after her, and you don't come after me." Darian's smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of respect, or maybe surprise, in his eyes. "You've got a deal," he said after a moment. "But make no mistake, Ms. Hensley. If she comes to me again, there won't be a negotiation next time." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She won't." The payment wiped out a large portion of Grandma's money, leaving me with just enough to cover the basics of starting over. As Kaya and I left the office, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger bubbling inside me. Relief that Marissa was safe, at least for now, but anger at how much I'd had to sacrifice. Again. Marissa was waiting for us back at Kaya's apartment. When we walked in, she jumped to her feet, her face full of hope and anxiety. "Did it work?" she asked. "It's done," I said shortly, tossing my bag onto the couch. "You're in the clear." She let out a shaky breath, tears welling up in her eyes. "Elara, I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Just don't. I've done my part. Now it's your turn." Her face fell, and for a moment I almost felt guilty. But then I remembered Grandma's letter, her words urging me to protect my future. I couldn't let myself get pulled into Marissa's mess again. "I've set up a meeting for you with a debt counselor," I continued, my tone firm. "You're going to learn how to manage your money and get your life back on track. And if you ever get yourself into trouble like this again, don't call me." Marissa nodded, her eyes downcast. "I won't," she said softly. "I promise." Kaya watched her with a skeptical look but didn't say anything. Once Marissa left, Kaya turned to me with a raised eyebrow. "Do you think she meant it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I've done everything I can. The rest is up to her." The days that followed were quiet but heavy with reflection. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at an uncertain future. I'd lost a lot: money, trust, and what little sense of stability I'd had. But I'd also gained something I hadn't expected: a sense of clarity. For the first time, I knew where I stood, and I knew what I needed to do. I sat down with what was left of Grandma's money and made a plan. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me through the next semester of college if I worked part-time. The rest would have to come from scholarships and financial aid, but I was determined to make it work. Grandma had given me the tools to start over, and I wasn't going to waste them. As I packed up my things to move into a tiny studio apartment near campus, Kaya helped me fold clothes and box up books. She paused at one point, holding up Grandma's letter. "You should frame this," she said. "It's a reminder of what you've survived." I smiled, taking the letter from her and folding it carefully. "It's more than that," I said. "It's a reminder of who I'm fighting for." Kaya tilted her head, giving me a questioning look. "And who's that?" "Me," I said simply. "For the first time, I'm fighting for me." And as I stepped into my new apartment that evening, with nothing but a mattress, a few boxes, and a head full of dreams, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and I was ready to make the most of it. The following weeks were a blur of adjustment and determination. My tiny studio apartment was nothing to brag about: peeling paint on the walls, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, and a view of the back alley. But to me, it was freedom. For the first time in my life, every corner of this little space belonged to me, and I intended to make it a place where I could rebuild. I threw myself into preparing for the new semester, determined to make good on Grandma's faith in me. Most of the money she'd left was gone now, thanks to Marissa, but what remained was enough for a modest start. I filled out scholarship applications late into the night, worked part-time at a local cafe to cover my rent, and spent my weekends poring over architecture books in the public library. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Kaya visited often, always armed with takeout or cheap wine, and her presence became a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this new chapter. She'd sit on my mismatched thrift store furniture, regaling me with stories from her bakery job and encouraging me to keep going, even on the hardest days. One evening, as we sat on my couch sharing greasy pizza, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks: Marissa. Kaya glanced at the phone, her face hardening. "Are you going to answer that?" I hesitated, my stomach twisting. "I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore it." Kaya reached for her drink, taking a long sip. "You owe her nothing, Elara. She's made her bed." She was right, of course, but something in me couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Marissa's call wasn't just casual. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Elara," Marissa's voice came through, sounding strangely subdued. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. "What do you want, Marissa?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. Then she said, I wanted to say thank you for what you did, and I wanted to tell you that I've started meeting with the debt counselor you set me up with." I blinked, surprised. "You actually went?" "Yeah," she said softly. "I've been going every week. It's harder than I thought it would be, but I'm trying." Her words hung in the air, tentative and unfamiliar. Marissa wasn't someone who admitted to struggling or apologized for her mistakes. Hearing her like this felt surreal. "That's good," I said cautiously. "I'm glad you're trying." She hesitated again before speaking. I know I've put you through a lot, Elara. More than I ever should have. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. For myself and for you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Marissa had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. But now, for the first time, she sounded like someone who had finally faced herself. "I hope you mean that," I said quietly, "because I can't go through this again, Marissa. I won't." "I know," she said, "and I'm not asking you to. I wanted you to know." The call ended shortly after that, leaving me feeling conflicted. Kaya watched me closely, her expression unreadable. "Do you believe her?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to." Kaya nodded thoughtfully. "Just don't let her pull you back in if she screws up again. You've worked too hard to get here." "I won't," I said firmly. And for the first time, I believed it. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to find my footing. My classes were demanding, but I thrived in the challenge. Architecture wasn't just a career path for me. It was a way to build something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away. Every time I drafted a blueprint or sketched out a design, I thought of Grandma Sylvie, of her unwavering belief in me. I was determined to honor her memory by creating something beautiful. Marissa kept her distance, but occasionally sent me updates about her progress. She'd found a part-time job and was sticking to the plan her counselor had laid out. It wasn't perfect, and I knew rebuilding our relationship would take time. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope for her. As for my parents, I didn't hear from them at all. They hadn't reached out since the day I left, and I didn't expect them to. It hurt, of course, but it also felt like a clean break, a chance to step out from under their shadow and create a life that was mine alone. One crisp autumn evening, I visited Grandma Sylvie's grave for the first time since everything had happened. I brought a small bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite, and knelt by the headstone, tracing the letters of her name with my fingertips. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I'm finally living my life the way you wanted me to. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of leaves and earth, and for a moment, I felt her presence so clearly it was almost as if she were standing beside me. I stood up, brushing the tears from my face, and smiled. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was building something strong, something unshakable, just like Grandma had wanted. And this time, I was building it for me. As the weeks turned into years, my life steadily transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The architecture program was grueling, but I poured every ounce of myself into it. Late nights in the studio, stacks of sketches spread across my tiny desk, and cups of cheap coffee became the rhythm of my life. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. One day, during my final year of school, I received a surprising email. The subject line read, "Sylvie Hensley Scholarship Opportunity." Confused, I clicked on it, and my heart stopped as I read the first few lines. It was a message from the local community foundation announcing a scholarship program created in my grandmother's name. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. My grandma, who had lived so modestly, who had given me everything she could, had apparently left even more behind. The scholarship was designed to help young women pursuing careers in fields where they were underrepresented, architecture being one of them. Tears filled my eyes as I realized what this meant. Even in death, Grandma Sylvie was still finding ways to give, still believing in people who might not otherwise have a chance. It felt like a sign, a reminder of her legacy, and it reignited my drive to succeed. The day I graduated was a surreal experience. Kaya was there, cheering louder than anyone else as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. She'd been my rock through everything, and seeing her in the audience, beaming with pride, made all the struggles worth it. Later that evening, I received another unexpected visitor, Marissa. She arrived at my apartment unannounced, holding a small bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Congrats, Elara," she said, her voice tentative. "I'm really proud of you." "Thanks," I said, surprised but grateful. "Do you want to come in?" She hesitated before nodding. We sat on the couch, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. She handed me the flowers, and I smiled as I placed them in a glass of water. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental coming from her. "How have you been?" I asked, breaking the silence. Marissa sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Better. I'm still working with the counselor, and I've been managing my finances. It's hard, but I'm getting there." "I'm glad," I said softly, and I meant it. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "Elara, I know I've said this before, but I'm sorry for everything. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about responsibility and not expecting others to fix my mistakes. You were right." I nodded, not sure how to respond. There had been so many broken promises and empty apologies over the years, but something about her tone felt different this time. It felt genuine. "I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. You've done something amazing, and I hope one day I can say the same for myself." Her words caught me off guard, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope for our relationship. "Thanks, Marissa," I said. "That means a lot." She stayed for a while longer, and we talked about lighter things, my future plans, her new job, and even a few memories of Grandma. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, and when she left, I felt a strange sense of peace. We weren't fixed, not entirely, but we were on our way. The first project I worked on after graduation was a community center in our hometown. It was a small commission, but it felt monumental to me. I poured my heart into every detail, imagining how the building would serve the people who used it, how it could become a space where dreams were nurtured and lives were changed. When the project was completed, I invited Kaya and Marissa to the opening ceremony. Standing in front of the finished building, with its clean lines and open spaces filled with light, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything I'd overcome, of the strength Grandma had always seen in me. As the ribbon was cut and people began to pour inside, Kaya wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You did it," she said, grinning. "You really did it." "Yeah," I said, smiling through the tears that threatened to spill over. "I did." Marissa stood nearby, watching with a quiet smile. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. We'd both come a long way, and though our journeys were different, we were finding our way back to each other. As I stood there, surrounded by the buzz of conversation and laughter, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, complete. I had a future, one I'd fought for, and a past I'd made peace with. And through it all, Grandma's voice remained with me, steady and unwavering. "You are stronger than they'll ever understand." She was right. I was. And I always would be. In the years that followed, my life unfolded in ways I could never have predicted. The community center project became a catalyst for other opportunities. Word spread quickly about the design, and soon I was receiving offers for similar projects, libraries, schools, and affordable housing units. Each one felt like a step closer to fulfilling the promise I had made to myself and to Grandma Sylvie, to build a legacy rooted in purpose and resilience. But as much as my professional life flourished, the personal challenges lingered. Rebuilding the relationship with Marissa was a slow, uneven process. She kept her promise to stay on the path toward stability, but trust didn't come easily, not after everything we'd been through. Still, she surprised me with her determination. She stayed with her debt counselor, paid off her loans little by little, and eventually went back to school to earn a degree in social work. The day she graduated, she called me with tears in her voice. "Elara," she said, "I finally understand what you meant all those years ago, about responsibility, about believing in yourself. I didn't back then, but now I do. Thank you for not giving up on me." Hearing those words was more healing than I could have imagined. It didn't erase the pain of the past, but it reminded me that people could change if they wanted to, and Marissa, for all her flaws, had proven that she did. One day, while sorting through some old papers, I came across Grandma Sylvie's letter again. I hadn't read it in a long time, but as I unfolded the worn paper and traced the familiar handwriting, I felt her presence as strongly as ever. Her words still resonated, a timeless reminder of her love and belief in me. The line that struck me most was the one about the money being a shield. At the time, I'd thought she meant it as protection from my family's manipulation, and maybe she had. But now I saw it differently. The shield wasn't just the money, it was the strength she'd instilled in me, the belief that I was worth fighting for. That strength had carried me through every challenge, every heartbreak, and every triumph. Inspired, I decided to expand the scholarship program that had been established in her name. I used a portion of my earnings to create a new branch of the fund, specifically for young women pursuing architecture and design. I wanted to give others the same chance Grandma had given me to pass on her legacy of generosity and faith. At the launch event for the expanded scholarship, I gave a speech that I'd written and rewritten a dozen times. Standing in front of a room full of students, donors, and colleagues, I took a deep breath and began. My grandmother, Sylvie Hensley, was the strongest person I've ever known. She taught me that strength doesn't always look like power or control. It looks like perseverance, kindness, and the courage to dream. She believed in me when no one else did, and because of her, I'm standing here today. This scholarship is my way of carrying her legacy forward, of helping others find their own strength and build their own futures. To anyone who's ever felt like their dreams are out of reach, I want you to know this: you are stronger than you think, and you are capable of more than you can imagine. Never stop fighting for the life you deserve. The room erupted in applause, but what stayed with me most was the look on the faces of the young women in the audience. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others looked determined, inspired. In their expressions, I saw a reflection of myself, a girl who had once felt small and unsure, but who had found her way through courage and the unwavering love of someone who believed in her. Years later, on the anniversary of Grandma Sylvie's passing, I visited her grave with Marissa. It had become a tradition for us, a quiet moment of reflection and gratitude. "She would have been so proud of you," Marissa said, laying a bouquet of yellow roses at the headstone. of everything you've done." "She would have been proud of you too," I said, smiling at her. "You've come a long way, Marissa." We stood there in silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cemetery. As I looked at the headstone, I felt a deep sense of peace. Grandma had been the cornerstone of my life, the anchor that had kept me steady in the storm. But now, I realized, I didn't just carry her legacy, I was living it. When we left the cemetery, Marissa turned to me with a small smile. "You know," she said, "you're kind of like Grandma now, always helping people, always building something meaningful." The comment caught me off guard, but as I thought about it, I realized she was right. Grandma had built her legacy in quiet, powerful ways, and now I was doing the same, not just through buildings, but through lives. And as Marissa and I walked to the car, the sun dipping low on the horizon, I knew I'd finally found what Grandma had always wanted for me. A life of my own, built on love, strength, and the courage to dream. The years continued to pass, each one a testament to growth, resilience, and the enduring love I carried for Grandma Sylvie. My career blossomed as I took on projects that aligned with my values: affordable housing, schools in underserved communities, and public spaces that fostered connection and belonging. Each design was more than just a structure. It was a reflection of the lessons Grandma had instilled in me, to leave the world a little better than I found it. Marissa and I remained in touch, our relationship mended by time and effort. She stayed true to her promise, carving out a stable life for herself, and even starting a small nonprofit to support women struggling with financial literacy. I attended her first workshop, sitting quietly in the back as she spoke to a room full of women with the same passion and determination I'd once doubted she possessed. When she caught my eye across the room and smiled, I knew how far we'd both come. One summer, I returned to my hometown for the first time in years. It was a bittersweet trip, full of memories that felt both distant and immediate. The house where I'd grown up looked smaller than I remembered, its worn exterior a stark reminder of the life I'd left behind. I didn't linger long. There were no ties left for me there, but I felt a sense of closure as I drove away, leaving the past where it belonged. Later that day, I visited the community center I'd designed years earlier. It was bustling with life. Children playing in the courtyard, families gathering in the meeting rooms, and teens working on art projects in the studio. One of the staff members recognized me and gave me a tour, pointing out the ways the building had impacted the community. "This place has become a second home for so many people," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You should be proud of what you've built here." I smiled, my chest tightening with emotion. "I am," I said. "But it's not just me. It's everyone who believed in what this place could be." Before leaving, I walked through the courtyard, running my fingers over the smooth edges of the benches and the stone pathway I'd helped design. In a quiet corner, I spotted something that made me stop in my tracks. A small plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "Dedicated to the memory of Sylvie Hensley, whose love and belief in others continue to inspire." Tears welled in my eyes as I traced the words with my fingers. I hadn't known about the plaque, but it felt like the perfect tribute. Grandma's legacy was alive in this place, just as it was alive in me. In time, I started my own architecture firm, focusing on projects that prioritized community and sustainability. I named it Sylvie Designs, a quiet nod to the woman who had shaped the person I'd become. The firm grew quickly, and before long, I had a team of passionate architects and designers who shared my vision. One day, while reviewing plans for a new project, a women's shelter in the city, I received a call from Kaya. Her voice was full of excitement. "Elara, you'll never guess what just happened," she said. "Remember the bakery I used to work at? The owner's retiring, and he offered to sell it to me. Can you believe it?" I grinned, already imagining Kaya running her own place. "That's amazing. Are you going to do it?" "Absolutely," she said. "And I want you to design the remodel." "Deal," I said, laughing, "but only if I get lifetime access to your pastries." Kaya's laughter echoed through the phone, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the friendships and connections that had carried me through the toughest times. The years ahead were full of milestones. Awards for my designs, partnerships with organizations that shared my values, and countless moments of joy and fulfillment. But the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones. Seeing the smile on a child's face as they played in a park I'd designed, hearing the gratitude in a mother's voice as she moved into a home I'd helped build, and knowing that every step I took was rooted in the love and strength Grandma had given me. On the 10th anniversary of Grandma Sylvie's passing, I organized a gala to raise funds for her scholarship program. The event was held in one of the buildings I'd designed, its open, airy spaces filled with light and warmth. As I stood at the podium, addressing the crowd of supporters, scholars, and community leaders, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Not just for what I'd accomplished, but for the lives I'd touched along the way. "Tonight," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to spill over, "we honor a woman who believed in the power of dreams. My grandmother, Sylvie Hensley, taught me that strength comes not from what we take, but from what we give. She showed me that even the smallest acts of love can create ripples that change the world. And tonight, we continue her legacy, ensuring that her belief in others lives on." The applause that followed was thunderous, but what stayed with me most was the quiet moment afterward when I stood alone by the windows, looking out at the city skyline. I felt her presence then, as I always did, a quiet reassurance that I was on the right path. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, "for everything." And as the lights of the city twinkled in the distance, I knew she was still with me, her love woven into every step of the life I'd built, a life of purpose, strength, and unwavering hope. As the years continued, my life became a testament to resilience, love, and the quiet power of belief. The success of Sylvie Designs allowed me to take on projects that mattered. Schools, libraries, community hubs, and I never lost sight of why I'd started. Each blueprint I drafted, every building I saw completed, felt like a new chapter in the story Grandma had set in motion so many years ago. One day, as I was reviewing the final plans for a housing project, my assistant knocked on the office door. "Elara, someone's here to see you. She says she's family." I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was well past business hours, and I wasn't expecting anyone. "Send her in," I said, setting the plans aside. The door opened, and to my surprise, my mother, Freya, walked in. Her once meticulously styled hair was now streaked with gray, and she looked smaller, more fragile than I remembered. She clutched a handbag to her chest, her expression a mixture of hesitation and sadness. "Elara," she said softly, "I hope it's okay that I came." I stood, unsure how to respond. It had been years since we'd spoken, since I'd walked out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and Grandma's check in my pocket. My heart ached with the weight of everything unspoken between us. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice even but guarded. She sighed, taking a hesitant step forward. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. about everything that happened, and I realized I never said the things I should have said. I folded my arms, unsure whether to feel anger or pity. And what should you have said? Freya looked down, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag tighter. That I was wrong. About everything. About how I treated you. About how I let Marissa's mistakes take over our family. I didn't see what I was doing to you until it was too late. Her words hit me like a wave, stirring up a mix of emotions I wasn't ready for. Why now? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. After all this time, why are you saying this now? She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Because I miss you, she said simply, and because I don't want to leave this world without making things right. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her it was too late, that the damage had already been done. But another part of me, the part shaped by Grandma's love and wisdom, felt something else entirely. Compassion. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. You can't undo what happened, I said finally, my voice steady but kind. But if you're really here to make things right, it starts with honesty. No excuses, no deflection, just the truth. Freya nodded, tears spilling over now. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered. I just want a chance to be part of your life again. We spent hours talking that night, unpacking years of pain and misunderstanding. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the first time, Freya listened, really listened to my perspective, and I began to see glimpses of the mother I'd always wished for. As time went on, my relationship with my mother continued to evolve. She made a genuine effort to support me, attending my events and showing interest in my work. Marissa, too, played a role in bridging the gap between us, often acting as a mediator when old tensions resurfaced. It wasn't always smooth, but we found a rhythm that worked, slowly piecing together a connection I thought was lost forever. One day, as we sat in the cafe near my office, Freya reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Elara, she said, her voice trembling, you've become everything I could have ever hoped for in a daughter. I'm so proud of you. Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed her hand. Thanks, Mom, I said softly. That means a lot. Years later, standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for my largest project yet, a sprawling cultural center designed to celebrate the city's history and foster unity, I looked out at the crowd and saw the faces of everyone who had shaped my journey. Kaya, beaming with pride. Marissa, standing beside her, clapping enthusiastically. Freya, wiping tears from her cheeks as she smiled at me. And though Grandma wasn't there in person, I felt her presence as surely as I felt the sun on my face. As the ribbon fell and the crowd cheered, I took a deep breath, letting the moment wash over me. I'd built something beautiful, not just the center, but a life filled with love, meaning, and the courage to keep moving forward. In that moment, I knew that Grandma's legacy wasn't just about what she had given me, it was about how I had chosen to carry it forward. And as I stepped into the bustling crowd, ready to celebrate with the people I loved, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the life I had fought for, the life Grandma had believed I could have. And it was only the beginning.